Hello, and welcome to Midnight Mysteries. I'm your host, Shaylin Jade, and we're diving into a story that's one part tragedy and one part mystery. This is the story of the Pollock Twins. So, picture this. A story that starts with heartbreak and somehow turns into one of the strangest and most talked about reincarnation mysteries ever recorded. It's controversial, it's emotional, and it's really gonna mess with what you think you know about memory, about grief, and maybe even about the soul. We're going back to 1950s England. It's this small, peaceful town. Nothing too dramatic usually happens there. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. But all of that changed one Sunday morning when a family's life was split apart in the worst way possible. What came next is either the most chilling proof of reincarnation you'll ever hear, or a story of heartbreak so deep it shaped reality itself. However you see it, I promise you'll be thinking about it long after we're done. So let's get into it. So let's set the scene properly. We're in Hexham, up in North England. It's one of those quiet towns, kids heading to school, neighbours chatting over fences, people going about their business. Nothing shocking, just normal life. But in May of 1957, that changed completely. There were two sisters. Joanna, she was 11, and Jacqueline, she was 6. They were walking to church on a Sunday morning with their friend Anthony, who was 9. This was quite common for the neighbourhood, so nothing out of the ordinary there. But then out of nowhere, a woman in a car, someone who was allegedly struggling with her mental health and under the influence of multiple drugs, drove straight at them. And it was later found it wasn't an accident. It's reported that she had just lost custody of her own children, and the grief and chaos in her mind turned into something dark, and she aimed her car at the kids. Joanna and Jacqueline were killed instantly. Anthony was rushed to the hospital, but he didn't survive either. He passed away on the way to the hospital. So Florence and John, their parents, were absolutely shattered. And yet, for the Pollocks, somehow this wasn't the end of their story. So after their tragic loss, Florence kind of pulled inward, focused on just holding the pieces of their family together. She was quiet, grieving, trying to be strong. But John, he couldn't let go of the girls. And he started talking about something that honestly probably sounded completely impossible at first: reincarnation. He didn't just wonder if their daughters might come back somehow, he knew it wholeheartedly. He was convinced that Joanna and Jacqueline's souls weren't gone and that they'd find a way back to the family. It sounds wild, but to John it was the only thing that made sense, the only way that he could handle his grief. Florence was Catholic, very traditional. She really struggled with that idea. It actually caused some serious cracks in their marriage because John was so sure and Florence was trying desperately to stay in reality to keep herself grounded. They argued about it a lot. John's conviction shook their relationship to the point Florence even thought about leaving. But then something completely unexpected happened. Florence found out she was pregnant, and the doctors were confident that it was just one baby, one healthy heartbeat, no surprises. And there was no family history of twins at all. Nothing to suggest that that might even be possible. But on October 4th, 1958, she gave birth to identical twin girls, Gillian and Jennifer. So if you think about it, John had been saying over and over that his daughters would return, and then suddenly there were two babies, identical, when no one expected it. So these twins, Gillian and Jennifer, at first they seemed like any other newborns. Cute, healthy, nothing to raise any eyebrows. But then Florence started noticing some things. Jennifer, one of the twins, had two very distinct birthmarks, one on her left hip and another right across her forehead. Those marks matched Jacqueline's. The exact spot where Jacqueline had a scar from a fall and a birthmark she'd had. It was like a punch to the gut for Florence. I mean, those marks being in the exact same spot would be a major coincidence, right? But as the girls grew, it got stranger. When they were toddlers, the family moved to Whitley Bay for a fresh start. Clean slate. But when the girls were 4 and they went back to Hexham for a visit, the twins started pointing things out. Places they shouldn't have known. They recognized the school Joanna and Jacqueline had gone to. They found their way to a playground, one their sisters had loved. And they did all of this without anyone telling them anything. They just navigated themselves. Florence had packed away all the old toys from the girls who had passed, hidden them away. But when Gillian and Jennifer stumbled upon them, they knew them. They knew what the toys were named. They split them up exactly like Joanna and Jacqueline used to. And they even mentioned those toys came from Santa, which was also true. Florence and John hadn't told them these stories. No one had. The girls were too young, but somehow they just knew. That was the moment where reincarnation didn't just feel like a theory anymore. It started feeling real. So it wasn't just places or toys. As Gillian and Jennifer got older, their personalities started showing, and they were eerily familiar. Gillian was born 10 minutes before Jennifer, and she naturally took on this more mature, protective role. Calm, kind of steady, exactly how Joanna had been with Jacqueline. And Jennifer, she was a bit more dependent, softer in spirit, just like Jacqueline was. But the creepiest moments, the ones that really stopped Florence in her tracks, came when the girls started talking about the accident. One day, Florence was walking past their bedroom, and she heard them playing. At first it seemed innocent, just kids acting out some scene, but then she realized what they were saying. Gillian was cradling Jennifer's head, and she whispered, "The blood's coming out of your eyes. That's where the car hit you." Florence froze. No one had ever told them those details. They were far too young to even hear about it. And yet they were recreating the tragedy. Another time, Jennifer was tracing the little birthmark on her forehead, and she just casually said, "That's where I fell on the bucket." A bucket. That matched an accident Jacqueline had as a little girl years before she died. And then there were the nightmares. Over and over, Gillian and Jennifer woke up screaming, terrified of cars. They'd get hysterical near traffic, clutching each other, saying, "The car is coming to get us." Florence had tried so hard to stay rational, to keep a logical explanation in her mind, but watching them relive memories they could have never known, it was impossible to ignore. So you can probably imagine word of this spread. It wasn't just the neighbours in Hexham whispering about it anymore either. It went wild. The idea that these girls might be reincarnations of their sisters, that was something people couldn't help talking about. And eventually, it caught the attention of a researcher, Dr. Ian Stevenson. If you haven't heard of him, he was a psychiatrist from the University of Virginia. super respected in his field. His entire academic focus was children who claimed to remember previous lives. And in 1964, the Pollock twins landed right on his radar. And he took it seriously. Like, really seriously. He travelled to meet the family, interviewed Florence and John, studied the timeline, looked at the birthmarks, and listened to every little moment the girls had described. He was meticulous, writing everything down and trying to find the patterns. And he didn't come out and say, yes, this is proof of reincarnation. But he did say that their case was incredibly compelling. It stood out, even among the other kids he'd studied around the world. Of course, not everyone bought it. Critics had plenty to say. Some argued the twins had older brothers and maybe those brothers talked about Joanna and Jacqueline when the twins were too young to remember consciously. Others thought maybe John, so fixated on the idea, had accidentally planted memories or hints without realizing it, like repeating names or stories in front of them even if he didn't mean to. And then decades later, the story got another twist. A podcast called Extrasensory tracked down Florence and John's grandchildren, Liza and Joanna, and they had a totally different version of things. They described John as a controlling, manipulative person. One of them called him a pathological, narcissistic liar, and they believed he twisted the story, made everyone buy into a fantasy, and basically forced Florence to play along. It's a heavy accusation. But here's the thing. That's only one side of the family story, because Extrasensory also found Jennifer, one of the twins. And she had her own perspective. And what she shared, it didn't match the granddaughter's story at all. So Jennifer finally spoke up after almost 40 years of staying silent. I mean, decades of people speculating, arguing, writing books, and she just stayed quiet. Until this one interview gave her an opportunity to defend her dad. She described her dad in a way that was totally different from what her nieces had said. According to Jennifer, John wasn't some manipulative puppet master. He was a loving dad. She said he was in no way perfect, but definitely not this monster that the others had described. She said he was deeply spiritual, but she swore he never pressured them or forced any of his beliefs on them. She even said they didn't know about Joanna and Jacqueline until they were teenagers. So all those memories, those nightmares, the weird coincidental knowledge that they had, that was all before they ever heard about the sisters. And then came the big question, the one everyone wanted to ask. Did Jennifer believe she was reincarnated? And the answer that she gave was that she was about 80% sure. She felt there were just too many details that lined up, too many feelings that couldn't be explained away. Even her husband chimed in during the interview and said, "It would be nice to solve the mystery once and for all, but I think it's always going to be a mystery." So, you've got these two little girls with birthmarks that match their sisters, memories of toys and places they'd never been, recreating a tragedy no one told them about, and acting out protective roles in exactly the same way as Joanna and Jacqueline. Then, you have a grieving dad who wanted so badly to believe his daughters would come back that he held onto reincarnation like a lifeline. And we can't ignore how messy memory can be, especially for kids. You've got older brothers who might have talked about their sisters, family stories that could have slipped through. Even if nobody meant to feed them information, it could still happen. It's just so hard to know. On one side, you have Dr. Ian Stevenson, this respected psychiatrist who truly thought their case was one of the strongest examples of reincarnation he'd ever come across. And on the other, you have skeptics who think it was grief and suggestion, plain and simple. And of course, you have Jennifer herself, grown up, still carrying those feelings, still believing something was there even if she can't fully explain it. And in the end, whether you believe it happened or think it's just a family clinging on to hope, the Pollock twins will always leave you with that question. So, what do you think? Was this a case of reincarnation playing out in real life? Or was it just a family piecing together the only story that made sense to survive their grief? These are the questions I love, because they'll probably never have answers. The Pollock twins, whether you see them as proof of something beyond or just the product of suggestion and trauma, it leaves a mystery behind that still makes people wonder. And that is the story of the Pollock twins. If you've enjoyed this episode, you can follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're up for it, leaving a quick rating or review really helps. And if you have your own strange or unexplained story, mystery, paranormal haunting, whatever it may be, I would love to hear it. Send it through to midnightmysteriesPodcast@outlook.com and maybe we can share it on a future episode. Next time on Midnight Mysteries, we're heading to Pennsylvania in the 1970s. Where an ordinary family moved into what they thought was their dream home, only to be terrorized by something dark, drawing in famed paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. So join me then as we explore the terrifying case of the Swirl family haunting. Until then, good night and sweet dreams.